All right, everybody. Thanks for those of you online. Thanks for bearing with us while we enjoyed the delicious food and beverages. And for those of you who are here, hopefully things was good. Yeah, right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Mims, W2WCM. Bill was lucky enough to be part of a DXpedition to Cuba back in the spring, and he's going to tell us all about it now. Here's Mr. T42T.
Thanks. First of all, let me say I'm honored to be able to talk about Tango 42 Tango in front of the best amateur radio club in Northern Virginia, Club of the Year, Hamvention 2021. Yes. And absolute leader of calories per QSO no matter where we are or what we're doing. Except for you folks that didn't show up here because you missed it. Okay, so what I hope to do tonight is tell you a little bit about what I learned when I went to Cuba as part of a DXpedition for the radio station Tango 42 Tango, which was we operated during the ARRL DX contest in early March of this past year. I'm going to talk a little bit about Cuba because I can't help myself, a little bit about radio, and then hopefully take some wonderful questions from you guys. So start thinking of them now. So here's where we begin, the Cuban flag. Let's talk a little bit about Cuba. As you can see, it's a tropical island. Nobody here knew that, did you? Well, first of all, let me ask this question. How many people here have been to Cuba? One? Yeah, you're going to hear about John Alpha Whiskey Mike later. Okay. So that means I can say almost anything I want, and you guys won't know the difference, right? So Havana's the biggest city, as it says there. Oops, I went the wrong way. How did I do that? So it's known for a lot of things which are pretty common. I mean, you know, it's a nice place. It's in the tropics. There's some lovely beaches, cigars and rum. Anybody who's heard anything at all about Cuba knows that there are cigars and rum there. Delightful music, and over 7,000 amateur radio operators. Cool guys. By the way, these are not Cuban amateur radio operators. So there's a map of Cuba. Let me just explain a couple of things. First of all, this shows you how close Havana is to Key West, and you can get a picture for how big the country is. It's much bigger than you might think. It's not just a little small tropical island in the Caribbean. It's 700 miles long, as it said in the previous slide. And it's a long way to go from Havana over to the southeast corner. Let me start off with downtown Havana. Now, this is Revolutionary Square. It's called Revolutionary Square Jose Marti. Who was Jose Marti? Well, interesting guy because he was the person that was probably most responsible for Cuba obtaining its independence from Spain. It was owned by Spain for a long time, and in the late 1800s they finally gained their independence from Spain. And so Jose Marti is held up as a hero in Cuba, and they named the square after him. And that picture there shows. Can you see that? Yeah, I guess you can. That white tower there, it's about 40 feet tall, is a monument to Jose. And that building there that you see, that tower, is over 450 feet tall. Sadly, the elevator didn't work that day, so we couldn't go up to the top and have a view. But I show this picture for another reason. There's 3 classic automobiles sitting there, because this is a very touristy place. A lot has happened here in Cuba's history. Fidel Castro gave a lot of speeches here, as did other Cuban revolutionary leaders. Several popes have held mass here, and a lot of tourists come here because this is one of the places that the people that drive these beautifully restored old classic American automobiles take them right away. Now, if you turn around from where I took that picture and look in the other direction, you see this building. And what is this building? Well, this building is the Ministerio de Comunicaciones de Cuba, which is the FCC for Cuba. And that guy on the front there, though, is Camille Cienfuegos, who was one of the revolutionary leaders associated with Castro and others. But this is the building where our license was issued. Now, there's a map of Havana, and particularly the old town, which is a part sort of in the middle there with all the red dots on it. But let me draw your attention first to the bottom left-hand corner where you can see number 6 which is Revolutionary Square, where we started our little adventure here. Now, if you look in the center there, you see number 7. Well, number 7 is Plaza Vieja, Old Square. Now, it used to be called Plaza Nueva, which is New Square. But then something happened, so there was some money involved, stuff happened, and next thing you know, it became Plaza Vieja. And over the years, it's been everything from a beautiful old Spanish, not touristy square with beautifully arcaded buildings that you'll see in a minute, to a car park, to a school, and now it's been converted back to its original condition with lots of upscale hotels, restaurants, and places for people like us to stay. Plaza Vieja. So on the left, you can see a picture taken in the early morning. You can see a bunch of school children there. At least I hope you can. Yeah, because it appeared to me that the Cubans believe that little kids should get some exercise in the morning before they sit down in classrooms and start trying to learn. So they come out in the square and they have a little fun and get to dance around and get themselves moving. Now off to the right, you can see a picture taken at night from the area where we stayed. That's a really upscale restaurant, and the one in the background there is an upscale hotel. And this is where we stayed. Look at the arcaded building. This building was built in the mid-1800s. It's been restored. U.S. citizens are not allowed to stay in hotels in Cuba, but we can stay in apartments, B&Bs, Airbnbs, and so forth. So we had an apartment which we rented on the top floor of this building in the back. It was really quite nice. This is my roommate, W9MK, Mike Kelly from Chicago, Illinois. And the reason I show this picture is because this is the first night we got there and we exchanged money. And at the time we were there, 300 pesos to the dollar. It's more than that now. I think it's like 350. I don't know, really. But he's holding about $10 worth of pesos there because we got a lot of 50 peso notes. And 50 pesos is, what, 12, 14 cents, something like that. So another reason I mention this and show this picture is because the prices in Cuba, in Havana at least, even the touristy prices are not bad. That complete breakfast was about $3. And it's special because you see there's some bread there. And in Cuba, they're not able to grow wheat, so they have to import flour, which makes it very expensive. But we still got breakfast for $3. And when you get ready to pay at a restaurant there, almost all in cash, because for U.S. citizens, you can't use your U.S. bank credit cards there. Got to pay cash. So the way you pay is they put the ticket on the side of a bucket like this because they know you're going to throw a lot of cash in there. You know, what's $3? Close to 1,000 pesos, right? A lot of 50 peso notes. Now, this one really struck me because I'd been there for 2 days before I realized that there are no Coke products available in Cuba. But there's Coca-Cola everywhere. There are posters, there are signs, stuff painted on the side of buildings, napkin holders, little ketchup holders, or whatever you want to call that. They were everywhere. All the restaurants we went to seemed to love Coca-Cola stuff, but there are no Coke products. You can get a Pepsi, but you can't get a Coke. All right, so talking about transportation in Cuba. It's a big deal. We take it for granted here. You know, we hop in a car or get on the metro, bus, whatever. It's easy. Not so in Cuba. But first, let's talk about the classic cars. Everybody's heard about these, right? So I decided that there are 3 levels of classic automobiles in Cuba. First, there's the top level, the fully restored jobs like this 55 Chevy, just like the one my parents had when I was a kid. Or that 58 Chevy I'm standing next to, convertible, is just like the one I had when I was a kid. Well, not quite. And then the 54 Chevy, the red one over there. Those cars were beautifully restored. I don't know what kind of engines they had. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the outside was great. And especially the convertibles, because those are tourist cars. When tourists come from the U.S. or largely from Europe, the people that own these cars or drive them get a hold of them, and they take them on some wonderful tours throughout Havana and the surrounding area in a convertible. And of course, this was late February, early March. It was perfect weather. So that's the top line. Then there's the middle level, which is the old classic cars that have been kept up in working condition, or official taxis like this one. This is the car that took us back and forth the 25, 30 kilometers every day. We had to go out to the site where our station was set up. It's a 1959 Ford station wagon, just like the one my parents had when I was a kid. Now this guy, Nerval, had installed a Mitsubishi diesel in it, and it ran like a top. That's his engine. He was very proud of that. And he had also done a homebrew air conditioner, which he installed in the back of this station wagon, which worked like a top. It was noisy, yes, but it kept us cool. And we could still fit 6 overweight Americans in this car. And then there's the classic automobile that's just kept going, somehow kept moving, because it's a personal vehicle. This is someone's personal transport. Now, there are other transportation options around Havana. One of them uses almost no gas at all, and one of them uses no gas at all. The one on the right there is kind of cool because this guy that owned this taxi on the right took me to the restaurant where we had our big banquet at the end of the DXpedition. So it was about a 20-minute pedal for him. I gave him $5. He was ecstatic. He waited all night long for me because I gave him another $5 to take me back to the Plaza Vieja. So, Cubans are very resourceful. I should have started off by saying this. Someone asked me to talk about what was the thing that surprised me the most or impressed me the most about this adventure. And I would say a couple of things. One of them is the resourcefulness Cubans. For example, in this upscale restaurant that's on the Plaza Vieja, they use old record albums as placemats. Don't throw them away. Why not? And then, as you can see, they don't need to build to manufacture bollards if they want to block off a pedestrian area. They got plenty of old cannons left over from the Spanish when they owned the place, so why not use them? Okay, moving along. Now I want to talk a little bit about Ernest Hemingway. Anybody here ever read any of Hemingway's stuff, or at least you know who he is? Okay. Well, he was in love with Cuba. He was also in love with Key West and Paris, and I don't know how the guy got around. Anyhow, we were out just east of Havana along the coast. There's a little village called Cojimar. And this restaurant, and we were greeted by this band there. They were fantastic. If I could get them to the U.S., we'd have another Buena Vista Social Club event. But anyhow, so this little restaurant was one of his favorite haunts. He went there to drink a lot. It's got a great bar. In fact, the bar is bigger than the eating area in the restaurant. And so Ernest came here fairly regularly, and he lived in Cojimar for a while. And in fact, they kept the table just as it was when he was there. And there's Ernest waiting for me to join him for lunch. I don't know if you can see that or not, but yeah, you can. Okay. So as you can see, it's in the corner, and you have this beautiful view over the bay there at Cojimar. And that's an even better view. And the reason I mention that is because that was the place that inspired the book called The Old Man and the Sea, which won a Pulitzer Prize almost immediately after he published it. So he wrote that while he was in Cojimar. Let's talk about some other important sites in Cuba. One of them is La Bodeguita del Medio. Now, it just turns out that W4 Alpha Whiskey Mike, sitting right in front of me here, has this on his kitchen wall, he told me. This is the menu from the Bodeguita del Medio, because it's really just a hole-in-the-wall bar with a small restaurant in the back. But everybody in the world has been there, and they signed the wall, including W4 AWM. Thank you. Real souvenir from Cuba. So the Bodeguita del Medio is one of the biggest tourist attractions. I don't know how they get all the people. The street is usually crowded with people drinking things like mojitos and daiquiris. You know this, right? Ernest Hemingway invented the daiquiri, and most people claim that he invented the mojito, a Cuban specialty. If you go about 2 blocks away from La Bodeguita del Medio, you hit Cathedral Square. This is an old 18th century Spanish cathedral, which is still in operation, and several popes have said Mass here. They keep the square in pretty good shape, and the church as well. Some great artwork. This is Che Guevara. Many of you have heard of Che Guevara. He was actually an Argentinian doctor who met Fidel Castro in Mexico, sorry. And they came together to Cuba, and he was a huge leader during the Cuban Revolution. And as you can see, there's some great artists in Havana, and that's a picture of him there. This is a food distribution module. So I didn't see a supermarket or a grocery store or anything remotely like that, was there? There are a couple of little bodegas which sold some foods, and oftentimes were out of things like cookies, because I was looking for the cookies. But as you can see, Cuba has a wonderful climate for growing things. So they have lots of food. Very few American companies there. No Coca-Cola products, no Starbucks, but they create their own. This is a great little cafe. You would have thought you were at Starbucks, but it's not. It's Starland. Now moving along, some more, getting back, I should say, to Ernest Hemingway. So he had money, and he bought a farm. Finca is Spanish for farm, I believe. Anybody here speak Spanish? Bueno. Is finca, is that correct? Farm? Muchas gracias, mi amigo. So Hemingway bought this place. It's like a plantation. It's beautiful. It's open, because they don't have winter in Cuba. So it had this beautiful open plantation with lots of rooms, lots of places to entertain people. Like the room on the left is like an outdoor-indoor porch. That was his writing room on the right. He wrote an awful lot of books while he was in Cuba, besides The Old Man and the Sea. If you sit in that white chair there and you turn it around, this is the view you get. You can see in the distance, maybe you can't tell there, but there's the skyline of Havana. So he would sit there in days, look out over the verdant green and see Havana, and it would inspire him to write. Okay, so still haven't gotten to radio yet, have I? But guess what? We're going to get there. So this is a map of western Cuba. You can see Havana up there sort of in the top right. And if you look to the center, you'll see Pinar del Rio. And just north of that is Vinales. Vinales is a beautiful valley. I'm told it's the most beautiful area in western Cuba, maybe in Cuba writ large. This is just a small picture of part of the valley. They have these magotes, which are these limestone mountains there. And that's a much more expansive view. You can see how verdant it is. It's also a great agricultural area because, again, everything grows in Cuba, including tobacco. This is another picture, and the reason I show this is because just to the left there is a fantastic resort up a hill and overlooking the valley. Beautiful people, beautiful women, beautiful food, beautiful rooms. I think they must have taken helicopters to get there because, it's a long drive from Havana. So we stopped at a tobacco farm. Everybody here is aware that Cuba is famous for cigars, right? And part of the reason is because the growing conditions there for tobacco are so good that it's the finest in the world, if you ask a Cuban. So here's our group. This is Los Americanos, Los Gringos, two of whom don't look like Americanos, and I'll explain that in a minute. We're all smoking cigars. If you look at me, I'm the guy in the back that looks like he has no idea what he's doing, and that's because I had no idea what I was doing with that cigar. The guy that's sitting down in the middle, right underneath the Cuban flag there, was the owner. Spoke excellent English, better than me, and he gave us a great explanation about how the tobacco was grown, and he made a couple of cigars for us right there. After showing us the tobacco barn where they harvest it and they take it and hang it up on strips of wood here in the barn until it dries. And that's the wild and crazy guy named Krish, Victor Uniform. I forgot his call sign. That's terrible. Anyhow, he's a guy from India who actually is living. He has a green card. He's living in North Carolina, and he's the wildest and craziest guy you ever met, but a good ham radio operator. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit about high tech. Just off the Prado, there's a restaurant that I call the Tech Restaurant. And you order your food on an iPad, and then this is how it's delivered to you. Yep, just a quick clip. All right, finally, you're going to hear a little bit about radio and Tango 42 Tango. So this whole project started about a year before we got there. It started because the fellow that I'm about to show you, Jim Milner, WB2REM, some of you may know him. Yeah, Ron, at least. By the way, here I am talking about DXpeditions to the guy who lived DXpeditions for decades. It's embarrassing, but thank you for listening. So Jim is the little short guy in the blue shirt, and this is us arriving at Jose Marti Airport with just a small part of the equipment that we took with us. After having started talking about this for a year in advance, where somebody one morning on an informal net that I participate in said to Jim, would you like to go to Cuba again? And I said, I would like to go. And he said, you'd like to go to Cuba? Okay. And he started talking to some other people. Next thing you know, we got a group together and went on our way. Because he'd been to Cuba 4 or 5 times before and had operated DXpeditions there as well. And so he had a connection. He knew this guy, Roberto Ibarras, who is Charlie Oscar 2 Kilo Lima. Speaks excellent English, is a wonderful tour guide, and he facilitated this whole thing. Let me show you a little bit more. By the way, that's Jim in his home in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Oh, let me digress for a moment and talk about DXpeditions. Anybody here not know what a DXpedition is? Anybody online not know what a DXpedition is? Okay, good. Then maybe I could skip this whole thing. I'll go fast. So there's like 3 kinds. There's the big ones, the really big ones, like Bouvet or Swains Island, where there's nothing there but mosquitoes or seals or whatever. And to get there, you got to go on a sailboat or some kind of boat for days at a time. You got to take everything with you, including your food, and it costs a fortune. So those are the big DXpeditions. Then there's the middle ones, like Glorioso Island, which just recently got off the air. Now this one is on an island with an airstrip, so at least stuff could be flown in. Not quite so bad. And there are people that live there. And then we come to my kind of DXpedition. So I was on a DXpedition in 2019 to the Galapagos with Jim. There we did have to take everything with us. We didn't have to take our food, though, and we had housing, and we had electricity. So it was easy. You could fly in. Small time. And in case of Cuba, it's even better because the Cuban amateur radio operators provided all of the basic equipment. We just took the radios. They had the amplifiers, the bandpass filters, the antennas, and so forth. So, how do we get there? Well, what do you have to do to get to Cuba? Well, there's a process. If you're a U.S. citizen, you got to have one of 12 reasons to go there, and I won't bore you with all of them, but here's a few. And the one that we used, the one that qualified us, was we were part of a non-athletic competition. ARRL DX contest is a non-athletic competition. Well, it certainly is non-athletic. And once we qualified for that, then you have to get a Cuban visa or travel card. It looks like this. If you have a reason and $112, you can get one of these. But you can't go there without it. And when you get to the airport in Miami, for example, we went from here to Miami and then Miami to Havana. To get on the flight, even to get to the place where you check your bags, you have to go through a documents check. And you have to have one of these things properly filled out. So, you need some more documents. I needed one of these. This is a letter of invitation from the Federacion de Radioaficionados de Cuba. That's the ARRL of Cuba. Nice guys. You'll see a little bit more about them later. And as you can see in Spanish and English here, I got invited. I wasn't the only one. The whole crew got invited. And that resulted in the Ministerio de Comunicaciones giving us a license. So the license itself is on the left there, and on the right is the list of the people. It shows 8 people, but 2 didn't make it. So there were only 6 from the U.S. that actually went. So you had to have all this stuff, or you're not going to get on the plane if you're a U.S. citizen. Here's the team. All 8 Cubans and all 4 Americans or people who came from the U.S. There's Krish and Rigo, who are the 2 guys sort of on the center left. Krish is the guy from North Carolina who's really from India. And Rigo is from Dominican Republic, but he lived in New York. He's a U.S. citizen, lived in New York for 30 years, worked as a travel agent until the internet. That's the end of travel agents, he said. So he left and went back to Dominican Republic. And then you see a couple of old gray-haired guys there, and you see some nice Cubans, and more about that in a minute. The place where we were operating from was called Finca Guanabanito Mi Hacienda. Now, what is this? Well, it was a farm plantation owned by Che Guevara. And during the revolution, he used it to provide medical care. He used it to teach people to read and write, because there was a lot of illiteracy in Cuba at the time. He also provided revolutionary training to people. So he had this fairly large farm, and the Cuban government owns it, and they turned it into a resort for Cubans. So there's places to stay overnight. There's a swimming pool there. There's a sort of an al fresco dining hall, which is fairly large, about the size of this room. There's little huts that you can rent for the day and have your whole family there. Big farm areas. There are farm animals. This is the hut, for example, where we were allowed to set up our radio station equipment. And in the background on the left, if you look in the background, you can see a big field. That field was perfect because that's where we could set up our beams, and there's some palm trees that were perfectly spaced for wire antennas. There you go. Inside the hut, when we were all awake at one brief moment, and we all set up. So we set up for a photo there. By the way, I mentioned that this is a farm, right? So we always had visitors. Now, this mother chicken and her babies were with us all the time. They came wandering through the radio shack, but they had fresh eggs there. So let's talk about the antennas. Again, the Cubans set these up with one exception. So they had a couple of beams, a couple of loops, and an 160-meter inverted L. So let me stop here for a second and ask, besides Kevin, who worked Tango 42 Tango? Oh, good. Quite a few people. Anybody online? Well, I can't see online, but if you worked us, great. So here's the high gain, 4 elements on 10, 15, and 20 meters. This is the example of resourcefulness. For example, when they set up the hex beam, they needed a guy clamp for the pole, right? Well, they didn't have any such thing in Cuba, so they made one out of copper wire. I thought that was as clever as all get out. That's the hex beam as it's completely set up and about ready to go up. It's a VHQ hex beam. Anybody here know what VHQ hex beams are? Okay, I'll tell you this. There's a guy up in New Hampshire who decided he was tired of his hex beam icing up every winter and collapsing. So he decided he was going to make one so strong that the ice wouldn't tear it down, and he did. And so if you want a hex beam that will never go away, Google VHQ hex beams, and that's what we took down there. We got a special deal on it, and it worked wonderfully during the contest. So the radio station consisted of ICOM radios with Kenwood, which they had for FT8. We were allowed to use FT8, but obviously it wasn't part of the contest. So this is us ready to go. We got everything all set up. Got the ground system all together, but ground rod deep into the earth just outside the hut. 250 volts on the mains. We're ready to roll. We hit everything up and hit the power, and then this happened. That doesn't show the level of smoke that we got, but that amp was smoking. So we think we found the problem. There was a screw went through all the way through one of these panels and touched the casing, which was grounded, and there you go. Okay, so this is me. Just before the contest started, I had just worked N1 GFV Nancy, and I think I just worked K4CDN, or was that during the contest? Was that before? Anyhow, I worked a couple of other VWS members just before the contest. And I was really happy with myself. I thought I was really something. Well, this is the way we looked most of the time. The cocoon on the bottom, by the way, is Roberto, our Cuban host. Now, let me show you. For those of you that have never been part of a DXpedition or a contest where you've got multiples working together, this is a little bit of what it sounds.
Tango 42 Tango contest.
KC5
Tango 42 Tango contest. CQ contest, Tango 42 Tango contest.
Okay, so this is the contest results, and as you can see, it looks like we're number 6 in the multi-2 category, but that's not really true because in the Caribbean, you have to take away those 4 stations above us there. They're all European. In the Caribbean, we were number 4, and Those three guys ahead of us with 11 million points or so, those are all big-time stations in Curacao. They're big, huge beams and stuff that are permanently set up. And they didn't have to contend with this. For 8 hours on Saturday, we had no electricity. For 1 hour or 45 minutes, we had nothing, and then it took that long to get the generator going. And we finally got it going, but of course it wouldn't provide enough amperage to drive the amplifiers. So we operated barefoot for 8 hours in the heart of the contest. And those guys in front of us, they didn't have to do that. So 6,400 contacts. I don't have any idea how many are unique, but it doesn't matter because this is a contest DXpedition, not just a typical DXpedition for some remote island somewhere. All right, so we're going to go back to Cuba. This is the front of the QSL card. By the way, again, if you've worked Tango 42 Tango and you didn't get a card, let me know. I'll get you one. Getting back to the Federacion de Radioaficionados de Cuba. This is me with the president, Iraldis Avila. And so here, the picture on the left is a, sorry about that, it's not a very good picture. That's their building. They actually have not just a meeting room, they have a whole villa. Because when the revolution happened, all the Spanish that left, well, their homes were taken over by the government, and this one ended up in the hands of the Federacion de Radioaficionados de Cuba. All right, so getting toward the end of the DXpedition, we decided we needed to have a big banquet to celebrate everything. There was a restaurant in the newer part of Havana called the Restaurant St. Christopher, I think that's right. And President Obama actually had dinner there when he visited Cuba in 2014, and so we decided that we would have dinner there too. And as you can see, there's one guy that really wants to make sure he's in the photo, right? I wonder who that could be. Anyhow, we went there. We had a wonderful meal, a lovely evening with wine for those who drink it, and just fantastic food. Thank you very much. Again, I'm honored to be here able to present this and talk about Tango 42 Tango to the Hamvention Club of the Year 2021 and the Calorificuso champ of the world. Thank you.